Hey guys, Jake Carlson here, host of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Are you ready to focus on amplifying your leadership superpowers? Let's go! Good morning, my friends and fellow elite achievers. Welcome to Modern Leadership, the podcast where each week we sit down with authors, entrepreneurs, and leaders to explore their journey, diving into the ups, their downs, and ultimately the lessons they learned along the way. Our goal? To show that everything is figure-outable. Today's guest expert is Kourtney Whitehead. Kourtney has focused her career on helping people reach their work goals, from executive searches to counseling to career transitions, through her positions at top executive recruiting firms and consulting companies. Her site, simplyservice.org, is an online community focused on supporting the creation of spiritually centered work lives. She is a sought-after speaker and podcast guest. Her new book, Working Whole, sitting right here on the desk in front of me, shares how to unite spiritual and work life. Kourtney, welcome to Modern Leadership. It's so great to have you with us.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
All right, we got a lot to jump into, but before we do, we got to take a step back and find out a little bit more about you. So we know about your work. Tell us about yourself.
I am a lover of trees. I'm a mother of 2 teenage sons, which is interesting, particularly given what I do for a living. So they're freshmen and juniors in high school, which creates a lot of think about what you might want to do with the rest of your life, though certainly you're not mapping it all out. But that takes a big part of my life right now. I have a husband and a miniature bulldog that I absolutely adore, both. And I also have a lot of other hobbies outside of the career talk. So certainly I love reading, and I know that's a part of your show. So I look forward to getting to that.
Excellent. And you said that you love trees, and I imagine being out in the DC area is just a beautiful area to be in when it comes to looking at the trees, especially during certain parts of the year.
Oh, definitely. The cherry blossoms are magical.
Very nice. Okay, we've got to jump now into this brand new book that you've got, Working Whole. And the subtext on it is this: how to unite your spiritual beliefs and your work to live fulfilled. And we were talking a little bit before we hit record, and I was saying, this is 2 topics that normally we don't put hand in hand. And yet you've spent your career really looking at how they go together. So let's talk about that a little bit. Tell me, how did you come up with the idea of this book? And then we'll jump into it from there.
Absolutely. So it's funny that you started the show saying for elite achievers. I will say that a lot of my career has been spent in those environments. So certainly being at top executive recruiting firms, as well as some of the top management consulting firms, I've been exposed to people that from a traditional sense have achieved what we set out to do, the schools you go to, the job titles you ultimately have, but to varying degrees of fulfillment. So don't get me wrong, there are people that achieve all of that and are quite fulfilled with it. But it's interesting to observe in large quantities people that aren't, people that reach the pinnacle of what they set out to do and are trying to figure out how they might do something else, or did they not use their time in the way they wanted, and when you realize that, how do you get to a new place? Be that a new career, be that starting an entrepreneurial endeavor. People still want to work. They still want to do something with their lives, but they want it to be more meaningful and inspiring at times. And so this question, sitting in this space and having these conversations for years, is really what led me to wanting to explore it and figure out how you can work on certain things in your personal life. And a lot of us are working on mindfulness. We're working on having better relationships. We're working on our spiritual beliefs. And all of that work is ultimately relevant to your work life. There's just no clear way for people to know how to bring them together. So that was the inspiration of the book.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about people not having a clear way of kind of bringing them together. But the reality is we don't have a choice. I mean, we are whole individuals. Our work life, our personal life, our spiritual life, it all goes together. And yet people are a little bit confused of how would I say, magnify it or really reach their highest potential within it. And so we hear often, figure out what you love, find your passion. But I think it takes more than that. And so talk to us a little bit. You're sitting down with somebody and they have this dream or they have this passion that they're involved in. Where do we go from there? What's our next step?
So what I run into more often than not, to your point, in that the direction of find your passion can be difficult, is that people don't actually know exactly what their passion is. They know that there's certain things they enjoy. They oftentimes have their fingers on what they can't stand or what has worn them out or they're tired of, but they don't really know what their passion is. And a lot of that comes from the idea of fake it till you make it, or fake branding and aggressiveness that are often taught in business. And they are almost a costume we're told to put on so early that we forget we're wearing it. And this is where a lot of people run into I don't know what I'm passionate about. I don't know where I want to go. I'm secretly afraid it won't make enough money even when I discover it. And there's a part of me that then can't even explore certain ideas. And so what I often do with people is really start at how do you get to a place where you're showing up as your full, whole self. Maybe work isn't the first place you do it. Maybe you are starting to do it in other spaces, and we figure out how you can practice on, frankly, small things. Oftentimes, I work with people, and then this will sound funny, but I'm quite serious around, are you eating for lunch what you really want to be eating for lunch? Are you wearing to work what you really want to be wearing? Are you saying yes and no?
Somebody pushed back on you and said, well, what does that really matter? Because I agree with you, and I think I know where you're going with this, but I want to talk about it for the listeners of the podcast here. Why does that matter? I mean, if we look at it, if I'm not really wearing what I want to wear, or I'm not really eating for lunch what I want to eat, why is that even a big deal?
It's a big deal because we teach ourselves that we can't trust ourselves to do what we truly want. And that lesson, that mistrust internally, it is something that breeds all kinds of decisions. It breeds going to meetings we don't want to, picking up clients we don't want to be with. It breeds taking our business into directions that we think will lead to success, but we secretly don't want to be doing. And in the end, when I'm working with someone who has achieved what they set out to achieve and they're frankly unfulfilled, it is because they have trained themselves to ignore what is true. They've trained themselves to not be in touch emotionally, spiritually, and they did this in ways that seem, to your point, like they don't matter. Like it makes no difference what you do from moment to moment, or if you say yes to something you want to say no to. But it ultimately does. It builds your life.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating because I think sometimes we make small decisions that kind of send us in the wrong path. And we think that they're just small decisions. Just a couple of days ago, I was reading an article about a guy who got pulled over in the UK in his car. And as the police were looking in the car, his car was so filthy, was so full of garbage that they decided to ticket him and give him a fine. And I thought to myself, you don't get to that level. I mean, to the level that you're actually getting a ticket by the very first hamburger wrapper you throw in there. It's exactly that little one that adds to the second one, to the third one, and so on. And I think that's kind of what you're saying, right?
Absolutely. It's absolutely what I'm saying. People don't notice. Everything seems minor. We think we're pleasing other people. We think we're doing what's right. We think we're providing ourselves security. And it's typically not until one day we are really unhappy. It's not until our car is filled with garbage and we're being ticketed that they approach someone like me to say, how do I get out of this? And oftentimes that is about taking off a costume. It's about unwinding a life you've built, which frankly cannot be done quickly, but can be done and should be done if you value your life experience enough.
And one of the things that I often talk about is this idea that small, consistent actions taken over time yield massive results. And what you're saying is take these small actions, start working. We have to unpack this whole life, this whole mask, this whole costume that we put on. Start with these small, consistent actions that are going to lead towards massive results. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
It's absolutely what you're hearing me say. And oftentimes my advice when people come to me, they want to make a quick job change. They want the very next job to pay the same amount of money, but just be infinitely more rewarding. And that doesn't tend to be the progression. And anyone who has struggled with this, with figuring out where would I be most fulfilled in work, I'm sure has experienced it. And it's because the work is something deeper, that there's almost work you need to do before the work. And if I think about my book, that's what the book is. It's the work before the work, where you need to get honest about whether or not you are actually integrating the things you value and the things you believe into your life, whether they're beliefs in your mind or whether they're actually playing out in the way that you are living your life and your work life, and then figuring out where will that lead you in the long run.
And one of the comments you just made is you run into people who are achievers that have set out a goal, some specific goal or destination that they want to reach. They've reached it, and then they look at themselves and they say, I'm not fulfilled. And part of that, I think, is because success is a journey. There's really no destination. And so it's that constant working towards it. And if you set your expectation, your fulfillment on reaching a destination that is impossible to reach, then you're going to leave yourself a little bit at a loss. But I also think that this is maybe setting the wrong goals, achieving the wrong expectations. So talk to us a little bit about that.
I define success as fulfillment, but I don't want that to be misconstrued to mean we don't need money or security, needing or wanting financial security or even luxury, frankly, is something you should not seek. That the spiritual among us can just be fulfilled in any job and at any income level. And I don't think that's accurate. And so the positioning and the book is really meant to be realistic about you can still have a lot of things. There's certainly some push and pull there, but it's about navigating what leads you to the long-term goal of fulfillment. For me, a certain amount of financial security, I'm going to need to feel fulfilled. I want to do work I enjoy, but I'm also going to need a certain level. But what I don't want to do is have my minimum for financial security or for other things in life, for work-life balance or whatever it is. I don't want to reach that minimum and not even notice. Never have a concept of this is actually enough for me. Now I can transfer my energies to gain other things. And a lot of people do not do that. What I see time and time again is the idea that more is always better, and we're sort of infinitely seeking more, especially as it relates to titles, money. Obviously, people growing a business experience this, and it may be that you reach a place. Frankly, you may not be there yet, so keep grinding if you need to. But it may be that you reach a place and you don't even notice where you could be quite comfortable here. And now it's time to explore, how do I make my days better and richer and my relationships deeper? How do I do more good in the world that will mean something to me while I also have enough?
So what can we do to start to recognize when we hit that level? I think you're right. I mean, we set out on this journey, especially as high achievers, those of us who are driven to work and to succeed, and we keep rising either the corporate ladder, we keep rising the income level or the opportunity and so on. And because we're always chasing that, how do we condition ourselves? How do we teach ourselves? How do we open up our minds to say, this is a level that we can celebrate. This is a time in our life that we can be, if you allow me to use the word, happy.
Mm-hmm. Well, breeding contentment is a decision. One of the things that I hope the book does is try to make clear which questions really matter and hold a person accountable for asking themselves those questions. So if you move through it and really take the time to answer the questions in your life, it should help you figure out, am I actually anchored in the way that I want to be? Do I actually have the things that I really want to pursue? And is contentment something I'm cultivating inside of ourselves? We are bombarded, not by accident, by commercials and things that tell us we should want more and more and more. And as much as people, I like to think I'm not so influenced by that I'm intellectually above it. I know that I'm not. I know that I can watch a commercial or I can have a conversation or be on social media, and that fear or envy can creep up. And it takes effort to really focus and say, this is not what I want out of life. I need to get really clear about what I do want and celebrate when I'm content. Teach myself that if I can want a little less, I can redirect my finances. I can redirect my free time towards things that actually interest me more. And I don't always make that call. Sometimes I take the fancy vacation if that's what I want to do in the experience, or buy the thing if that's what I want to do. But it's actually about the awareness to not do it as a default.
So recently I've been studying a little bit of Sean Achor, and if you're familiar with him, he wrote The Happiness Advantage and many other books, a professor at Harvard. And one of the things that he talks about is how those who chase success will never lead to happiness, in that if success is your goal, then happiness will, be out of your reach, out of your grasp. However, those who focus on seeking happiness or contentment or fulfillment, if you will, that always leads to increased success. So talk to us a little bit about that idea.
I'm really glad you asked that. It's almost a catch-22 because it is the people who are least attached to the outcomes of their work that tend to produce the highest quality of work, but also more. What I have found in my own life and in working with individuals that are truly in a calling or a place of fulfillment with their work lives, and sometimes that is in just a regular corporate job, and sometimes it's in an entrepreneurial endeavor or something else, is that they have an enormous amount of energy. They certainly do not have more hours. And this is not about the idea of figuring out how to grind on something, because grind in some ways associates with stress, with pushing the rock uphill and trying to figure out how to make yourself do more so you can outwork people. That's a completely different positioning. But people who are truly working whole tend to just work at their highest potential and generate a level of energy and the ability to clarify their goals in life in a way that just tends to generate abundance. I'm always hesitant to say that because I don't want people I'm working with, or even frankly, people who read this book, to read it with the intent of making more or of being more successful. But the fact of the matter is that they often do end up becoming.
Yeah, and what I hear you saying is this idea that causes lead to effects. And the causes is where we need to put our attention and our intention, in that effects, the outcome, the results, those are going to happen. But what we need to do is set our train on the right track. We need to be moving in the right direction. And so as we focus on, let's say that the outcome that we want is a paycheck that pays $200,000 a year, a great outcome. However, what we need to focus on is the causes that lead to that effect or that outcome. And that is, the type of people that you surround yourself with, the type of work that you do, your work ethic, how hard you lean in, and also your environment, the type of career that you choose, and really focusing on the causes that lead to the effects. And I think that's what I hear you saying.
It's absolutely what I'm saying. And there's also, and it's the reason why your spiritual beliefs are particularly helpful in your work life, is because it helps you be at peace with uncertainty. And to what you were saying with the causes and effects, so much of it is unpredictable. How it all ends up generating success or abundance, you really can't put your finger on. But if you end up working at your highest potential, if you end up staying the course, which is also something that's hard to do when you're not really doing it for the right reasons because you get burnout or disgruntled or just can't exhibit the right level of patience. But when you're truly committed to the work itself, there just is a process that happens, and I've seen enormous success come out of it.
And this leads us perfectly into a quote that I had taken out from your book. The people who learn to trust in a career process they can't predict and who can wait for the right opportunities are better positioned to realize their ultimate goals. Patiently and methodically working towards fulfillment in their careers is often the better strategy for realizing compatible professional experiences. And I want to have you break that down a little bit because I think this perfectly dovetails with what we were just talking about.
Yes. So if I were to think about breaking this down, there tends to be a thought about our careers that has a lot more to do with when we tell people what we do or when we're writing up our resume or our bio, and we think about our careers in these huge chunks. Who do we want to be when we're writing that bio? Who do we want to be when we're approached at a cocktail party? But ultimately, our careers are just individual days, lots of them, day after day after day after day. And when we enjoy the work of those days, when we are truly fulfilled and able to just trust in a process that we can't predict to the point of the quote, we are able to keep showing up and doing what that day demands of us. So in your case, as an example, today, the day is calling for you to have a conversation with me. And I'm sure you have conversation after conversation, and there's all kinds of work that has to get done on this podcast. But it really isn't until you have years and you've built a significant audience and you've put together all kinds of mundane days that you ultimately get to reap the success of that. And what I find is that when people are doing it for the wrong reasons, when they are not truly fulfilled in the work itself and the days themselves, don't have that patience and contentment, they end up doing it, maybe having an amazing start and doing it for 6 months, doing it for 1 year and dropping off, missing the things that ultimately build what they are trying to get to. And that's fine. I actually don't mind when people quit things. I encourage quitting. So to be clear, when you've moved in the wrong direction, you don't want to just stay the course to prove that you can do it or that you're fulfilled. Sometimes these sort of roles are there to teach us lessons, but I do recommend that you notice that when I truly love what I do every day, when I really enjoy writing this book and I'm writing every day and I'm feeling filled and knowing that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing in life, the book ultimately gets out. The book ultimately gets talked about. In your case, the podcast gets written or the business gets built for someone else. And keeping that in mind, it often gets lost for people when they're setting goals. What are they really going to have to do every day?
I really love this concept, this idea of stringing together a whole bunch of mundane days. And as you were talking about this podcast, we started in November of 2014. This is right around the area of 250 episodes that we've put out. And month over month, we are getting more and more subscribers, more and more listeners to the podcast. And all of that is a result of the mundane days put together in the beginning. Now, I will say the hours that I'm on the phone, the hours that I'm talking to you as the guest or the other guests are not mundane at all. I mean, this is the highlight of my day, of my career, of my life. I love jumping on the phone and talking, but there's a lot of other things that I've got to do to make this work. And I think in all of our jobs and in all of our careers, we're going to have moments that are awesome, that we're going to be smiling and we're going to be really in the flow and doing what we love. But every job and every career is going to have those things that aren't our favorite. And so, Kourtney, as we look at those not our favorite parts of the job, what can we do to kind of keep a smile on our face and keep moving in the right direction, even when those mundanes, those day-to-days start to try to get us down?
I think this is where your spiritual beliefs come in most helpful. And to be clear, when I say spiritual beliefs, that may or may not mean religious beliefs to you. But the idea of if you are actually cultivating in your life contentment, surrender, the idea of patience, all of those things are not about being infinitely happy. It's not about riding a constant high. When we're truly anchored, what we're building for ourselves is resilience. We're building patience. We're building the ability to ride through those mundane things. And frankly, for them to not feel quite as bad. They don't feel great, but they don't feel quite as bad. They just feel part of a process that we are willing to trust in. And in a lot of ways, spiritual beliefs are trusting in a process. And so the better we are at doing that in our spiritual lives, in our personal lives, the better we'll be in doing it in our work lives.
And one of the words that you just threw out in that section was anchored. And that takes me back to your book. So your book is laid out in basically a part 1 and a part 2 format. Part 1, you talk about integrated and you go through 8 chapters in there. And then you jump over to part 2, which is anchored, and you go through another 7 chapters there. So tell me a little bit about this idea of how you formatted the book, separating integrated and anchored and what that means.
That's a great question. Anchored to me is what people see. It's what you use in the output of your life. When you are anchored spiritually, you know who you are, you know what environments you want to be in, you know how to align your priorities and your purpose and live in joy. And oftentimes when someone thinks about a concept like how to bring your spiritual beliefs into work, they want to get right to the anchored part. They want to skip the step, which is part one, which is have you actually integrated what you believe into, forget your work, just your life in general. And so the first 8 chapters focus on 8 universal beliefs. So humility, surrender, discipline, gratitude, connection, love, power, and patience. And that is taking each one at a time and really walking the reader through the process of saying, have I integrated what I believe about this concept into my life? I may believe in it. I may intellectually think it's helpful in life, but am I actually living this out? And what would it look like if I did? Especially as that relates to your work life, but personally as well. The second part then is saying once you've gotten there, and no one does this perfectly, I don't have my beliefs fully integrated in every part of my life, but once I feel reasonably anchored in what I believe, then I can do the work of thinking about which the next chapters are, is my identity, am I showing up in the world in the way that projects this? And if not, how do I judge that? How do I use, one of the chapters is purpose. How do I use the pain and maybe not so great experiences that I've had in my life in a way that helps me feel a deeper meaning and purpose in the work that I do? And for a lot of people, there are ways to connect into that. That doesn't always mean you are volunteering or working for a nonprofit, but there are ways to then use some of what you believe into the rest of your work.
Yeah, and Kourtney, you did a great job of kind of walking through the framework of this book. And I've got to tell you a little side story on this. I was out of town when your book arrived. It was sent by your publicist over, and my wife, went through the mail and opened up the package, and she called me. I was out of town, and she had sent me a picture and texted me a picture of the book. And she said, Jake, you need to read this book right now. And so I said, well, okay, then. I mean, when she says to read a book, I pick it up and read it. And so I'm grateful to have this opportunity to talk with you, to go through this working whole. I love this idea. Alas, we don't have much more time to talk about the book. I encourage the listeners to go and pick up a copy and to really dive in, to understand how whole individuals we are and how our work, our personal, our spiritual lives are all integrated, and how that impacts our fulfillment, our happiness in life. But now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about our final section, which is learning from leaders. Are you ready?
I am ready.
All right, perfect. Our first question then, is the book currently on your Kindle or bedside table? What are you reading?
I am reading, and I tend to read 2 books at a time. So I read one fiction and one nonfiction book, and I switch back and forth, usually fiction at night. And so I'm reading a book called The Heart. It's a French translation of a novel about a heart transplant that's taking place and all the players in it. So the family of the person lost, as well as the person gaining the life. And it was wildly successful in France, and it is recently released in the US, and I have been really, really enjoying it. And I'm also reading a book called Co-Human Harmony, which is written by an interfaith pastor, and it focuses on how we have conversations across great divides.
Kourtney, I'm exactly like you. I read 2 books at once, one of them fiction, one of them business. The fictional books tend to be more about assassins and secret agencies and spies and so on. But I feel the same way. Like, I like to go to bed at night reading some fiction, but during the day, I'm all about picking up these business books and really taking my career and my involvement to the next level. So thank you for sharing those. Our next question then is your leadership superpower.
So my leadership superpower is, if you've seen, or any of your listeners, the movie Sixth Sense.
Of course, yeah.
There's a line where they say, I see dead people. And I have always jokingly, but really seriously felt that that's my superpower. I just haven't, I see what is very, very special about one individual, something that just nobody else could possibly have. And I can't help but see it. I see it in people I don't even like. I see it in people I disagree with. It's just an inability not to somehow notice what makes them special.
Well, I love that you brought up the Sixth Sense, and I got to share just a little side story. So I've been telling my kids about this show forever. And my oldest is 14 and my youngest is 8. And I've been telling my kids about this movie, The Sixth Sense. The Sixth Sense. You got to see it. It's so good. I hadn't seen it since like the 90s or whenever it came out. A long time. But I would tell them, oh, I see dead people and so on. So finally, we find this movie. I don't remember if we picked it up at Redbox or where we got it, but we get it and we start it. And I had forgotten how intense this movie really is. And by the time we were 10 minutes into it, I was the only one watching the movie. I looked around and everybody else had scared out. So yes, a great movie, but a even better superpower in that you see this key trait that individuals have that is such a value to the world that maybe they don't see themselves and those around them don't see. And then you focus on kind of cultivating it and bringing it out and using it for the better good. So great superpower. Thank you for sharing. Our next question then is a motivational quote, philosophy, or mantra, something that you live by.
So this one was a lot harder. What came to mind was be at peace.
Yeah.
Which is quite simplistic, as well as a second one that I once heard in a sermon that said, go to sleep in peace, wake up in joy. And I sometimes think about that phrase as the measurement of my life, whether or not I can go to sleep in peace and wake up in joy as really being the only thing that matters.
Boy, I really like both of those thoughts and especially how you apply it. So thank you for sharing that. Our final question then is the book that you most often gift or refer to friends, family, and colleagues.
I have two here again. And interestingly enough, until I knew I had to answer this question, I didn't realize they had anything in common. But the first one is called The Overstory by Richard Power. And it is a book about trees and environmental activism, but it's a novel. It's a massive book, absolutely life-changing. It's one of those books that I feel like since I read, I will never be the same. And so I am constantly recommending it to people just because it has that much of an impact on a person when they read it. And the second book is called Overview. It's actually more of a coffee table book, and I give it to clients constantly. I've probably bought at least 100 of these books over time to send to clients. And it's a new perspective on the Earth. It really is just satellite pictures of a variety of time lapses, a variety of parts in nature, industrial parts of the world. It's absolutely fascinating.
And I imagine beautiful pictures.
Very beautiful pictures, yes.
Oh, very cool. Well, I really appreciate you walking through, learning from leaders with you. Before we let you go today, Kourtney, any last bit of advice, and tell us, how can we pick up a copy of Working Whole and connect with you?
So the last piece of advice is to please don't settle. If you suspect you are not fulfilled in the work you're doing with your life, keep pushing forward. And you can find Working Whole on Amazon or anywhere that online books are sold. You can also reach me at my website, which is simplyservice.org, and all of my social media handles are there as well.
Well, excellent. We're going to link all of that up, including how to get a copy of this book. I was just over on Amazon today. I see only 5-star reviews. I, of course, have my copy here. And you know what it has across it? It has a not for resale. I was privileged enough to get a book even before it came out. So I'm really pleased to have that. Kourtney, you've been a wonderful guest. Thank you for coming on today and being this week's Modern Leadership Guest Expert.
Thank you so much.
All right, my friends, and a big thank you to Kourtney for coming on the podcast this week and sharing with us this whole life concept. You guys know I'm a big believer in this whole life concept. And the idea that came to my mind during this episode was this idea of overwhelm. And I hope to do some more writing and talking about overwhelm as we move into the future. But I don't believe in overwhelm. I think it's lack of clarity. I think as we gain clarity, as we know what the next steps are, as we know what needs to get done, as we are able to simplify our objective and the direction that we're moving, all of a sudden overwhelm floats away. And so I really think this idea of integrating, our whole life, our personal life, our professional life, our spiritual life, all of this integrated into one whole and really living up to our full potential is such a valuable concept, valuable topic. And so thank you to Kourtney for coming on. Of course, everything that we talked about in this episode can be found at jakeacarlson.com/ML137, episode 137. And until next week, I want to wish you the very best of days, an even better life, and never forget, everything is figure-outable. Thanks for listening to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Speaker Jake, on Twitter at Jake A. Carlson, and of course the website, jakeacarlson.com. See you there.